there's okay. Yes, sir.
Thank you very much for that amazing and wonderful speech.
Thank you.
I wanted to ask a question about solutions and the movement, and you raised the fact that there are some very crucial differences between South Africa and Israel, and with respect to the question of the kind of movement we need that will really challenge Israel and U.S. imperialism, which funds it. I wanted to point out some of the ones that I see, which are one, that I think black labor and African labor was much more crucial to the functioning of the capitalist and economic system of South Africa than Palestinian labor is to Israel, and therefore they had much more of an internal wedge in terms of creating resistance by withdrawing their labor and striking and that kind of thing. And furthermore, I think that Israel is much more crucial to the project of U.S. domination of the entire Middle East. And they recognize that, they see that, that's why they fund with U.S. aid and so on, regimes across the entire region. And for that reason, I believe that we may need something beyond BDS as well that could truly challenge U.S. empire. Perhaps, we need to look to the labor movement and a broader social movement that can really challenge the structures of power here beyond just BDS. And I wanted to get your opinion about that.
Yeah, those are great points. It is very different. I think that people often point out correctly that the South African economy was largely dependent on black labor in a way that Israel isn't. That's actually exaggerated, because even today Israel is quite dependent on labor of Palestinians. The settlements are still being built largely by Palestinian labor, and there is still much of Israeli agriculture and industry inside the 1949 ceasefire line is still Palestinians, and there's a collusion with Israeli employees. They still go across the border illegally and work. And even there was a couple of studies that came out, or articles in the Israeli press in the last few months, that even with the isolation and blockade of Gaza, the Gaza economy is still worth a couple of $1 billion a year to Israel, and the West Bank even more, because of the Israeli goods, the forced monopoly that Israel imposes on them. But having said that, the part of the research that we have to do as a movement is into what those vulnerabilities of the Israeli economy are. And one of them is, I spent a lot of time in, I spent a year in Ireland in 2007, and it was amazing how much Israeli produce and other goods are sold in European supermarkets. It's just amazing. So Israel is highly vulnerable to a consumer boycott in Europe. It's harder in the US because, it's parts like chips inside Motorola phones. Prilosec. Spread the word. And so the vulnerabilities are different. I think the broader point about connecting this movement with others, the other thing people say about South Africa, they say, well, political apartheid ended, but economic apartheid is still there. There's still tremendous inequality. I think that underplays some of the achievements, but to a large extent it's very true. But South Africa didn't emerge from apartheid into utopia. It emerged from apartheid into a really terrible neoliberal global system. And it didn't emerge, as an island exempt from all the same neoliberal pressures and policies that every other country faces, and neither would Palestine. So I think that we have to connect this activism to a broader movement. And I agree that for now the US goal is still to dominate the Middle East region, clearly. But I think that's becoming simply unaffordable. These adventures are literally bankrupting the country. It's already bankrupt. And I think that even many of the elites in this country recognize that Israel is not an asset in dominating the region. That's an argument that's made by the Israel lobby, but the reality is Israel is a tremendous burden. You know, if Israel was such a great asset, why aren't Israeli troops fighting alongside NATO in Afghanistan? Why aren't they helping occupy Iraq? Why, you know, of course Israel provides secondary services to all of these occupations, but the point I'm making is Israel has consistently been a liability, not an asset. And I think those contradictions are becoming clearer. After the Israel played a similar role to South Africa during the Cold War. South Africa was the Israel of Southern Africa. After the Cold War, the US didn't need the apartheid regime anymore, so that's part of why it collapsed. It's not the whole story. Same thing happened after the Cold War to Israel. And in the 90s, we began to see a bit of pressure for a peace process, and Israel had kind of lost its purpose in the American scheme. 9/11 was a great gift for Israel, and Netanyahu said it, because it allowed Israel to reinvent itself and rebrand itself as, you know, the avant-garde of the West in a war of civilizations against radical Islam. And that is a message that depends on demonization, racialization, and Islamophobia. And so we see support for Israel being tied into the broader racist and xenophobic and Islamophobic movement in this country. So part of fighting for justice in Palestine is fighting against racism in the United States. Fighting against racist. Let's see. We'll come to you. I'll try to get to everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, just about what you were just talking about. Could you speak more about what you see as the key links that we can make between movements, the kinds of joint struggle that we need to be making maybe in this country and maybe elsewhere, and also just about our organizing together in the Palestine Solidarity Movement? Could you talk about what you see as maybe things that we can do to make this movement more effective and stronger? What kinds of power dynamics within this movement do we need to be investing in now?
Yeah, you know, I'm going to give one idea that comes to mind, but I think in this room there are going to be hundreds, if not thousands, of better ideas, and I hope you're going to go away and continue those discussions. We heard this morning a great idea, and I put out a tweet about it, about looking at the Student Farmers Alliance organizing kit with the Taco Bell campaign. But we should go beyond that and look at the situation of migrant workers in this country and the border in general. Last year, or earlier this year, I visited the US-Mexico border just south of Tucson and saw the border wall that's being built and going through communities, cutting through communities. As they say there, we didn't cross the border crossed us. And the whole regime of militarization of the border, of criminalization of people, you know, moving along paths that they've moved for hundreds or thousands of years, and the nexus of Israel selling its technologies, its border and surveillance technologies in the U.S. But I think that's I was talking to someone earlier about Mike Davis, who's really linked these things together so well, because he sees sort of like a global wall, where, you know, the southern part of the wall is the US-Mexico border. The eastern part is the West Bank wall. In Europe, the southern part is the border between rich Europe and North Africa. And so it's part of a global system of maintaining islands of privilege and wealth for a tiny fraction, high-consuming tiny fraction of the world's population, and keeping the rest out, and a whole global system of surveillance for that. So I think that issue is very, very important in this country. But I think the issue of racism in general in this country, it's frightening, the kind of racism that